Hola. Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. And thank you for joining us for this important conversation. The World Bank Group at the Forest Frontier, Rethinking Forest Finance and Communities. My name is Carolina Juaneda, and I'm with the Bank Information Center, and I will be moderating this discussion. So, the goal of this panel is to open a conversation between civil society organizations, World Bank Group representatives, and community voices to better understand the different perspectives, identify challenges, risks, and think together about alternative approaches to the bank's engagement in the forest sector in Latin America. So I want to highlight here that industrial forestry is not the same as natural forest. When we talk about industrial forests, we refer to large areas covered by monoplantations, in most cases eucalyptus. The wood from these plantations is either used for the production of paper or as biomass to supply iron furnaces. You can see in this slide many projects that are being supported by multilateral development banks, including the World Bank Group, that includes EBRD, IFC, IDB Invest, and others across a specific region between Paraguay and Brazil. Communities and local organizations have pointed to issues such as deforestation, biodiversity loss, poor labor conditions, and violations of indigenous rights and Afro-descendant communities. Communities call these areas the green deserts. So these concerns call for a deeper conversation about what sustainable forest finance means. So are these investments genuinely helping to protect forests and improve livelihoods by creating quality jobs? Or they are in practice exacerbating monoculture expansion, land concentration, and marginalization of local communities? What are the aggregated impacts of all these projects in the same area happening all together at the same time? These are the type of questions that we want to solve in this panel and get all the perspectives. Today we will explore together and shed light on these different issues. Our aim is to engage in a constructive and forward-looking dialogue and exchange knowledge to understand what's the bank's approach and vision in this sector, what are the concerns from the communities, and discuss if this is the development model that we need for local development. Now, let me briefly explain how the session will run. So each panelist will have about 4 minutes to respond to one or two guiding questions that I will propose, and then we will follow up with a second round, and then we will open a Q&A session. So we're very fortunate to have with us today an outstanding panel representing a range of perspectives. Here with me is Tuka Karsten, the Global Environment Acting Practice Manager of the World Bank. Anup Hawani, the head of the Global and Agribusiness at the International Finance Corporation. He's not here. He will be arriving soon. Benoit Bosquet, they are the Regional Director for Sustainable Development at the World Bank. You can sit here at the panel now. Yes. Sergio Baffoni from Environmental Paper Network, Omar Jampey from Centro de Estudios Genioy in Paraguay, and Jessica Holes from Instituto Mayra in Brazil. Unfortunately, Omar and Jessica weren't able to be here in person due to visa and travel restrictions, but we're happy to have a virtual session. So thank you all for being here and for contributing your expertise and experience here. And with that, let's begin with the first round of questions, starting with Tuka from the World Bank. So Tuka, what's the bank's position on forestry investments, and how do large-scale forestry projects align with the climate development goals, and how community voices are being integrated in this type of projects?
Thank you very much. And And the moderator introduced this as a kind of session that focuses on the Latin American context. But I would like to kind of give some remarks from a kind of more global perspective and how the banks and bank groups approach to the forest sector builds some kind of global experiences. And this discussion is extremely, extremely welcome. If we think that of the land area of this planet, roughly one third is covered by forests. And depending on how you count it, 1.2 to 1.6 billion people depend on forest resources one way or another. So in their livelihoods, directly in their livelihoods. So it means that the discussion on forests, forest management is extremely, extremely important. And I would like to kind of emphasize that when we talk about forests, it should be somewhat kind of wide concept. We know countries have their national definitions, FAO has their own, not dwelling too much into the kind of discussion on what's forest and what's not. I think we should discuss of treescapes, landscapes with trees, including drier forests, Miombo in Africa, Cerrado in Brazil, etc., so that we kind of recognize that we are talking about landscapes with trees. Not just kind of the tropical moist forests, the iconic rainforests, but also drier forests. They are extremely important for people who live there, biodiversity, etc. So a couple of points on the big picture approach to forests we have in the bank, and perhaps the most defining concept is the multifunctionality of forests. Forests serve very, very many different purposes, and they are an economic good, they are an environmental good, and they are, very importantly, also the environment where people live. People who depend directly or indirectly on forest resources. And therefore, the question or kind of key concept in managing forests is that we recognize the different types of forests and recognize that different forests require different management practices, and we have to understand that in different places we have to focus on different things. And second point, obviously, those who've been attending the events this week recognize also the focus on jobs. Forests are a huge economic resource that create millions of jobs. Some sources refer to 33 million, some sources refer to 86 million jobs being supported by sustainable forest management. I think it very much depends on how you define, how much you include the value chains that are built on forests. So forests serve different purposes for different people. And one thing that's also very central in our approach is how to work with communities that live in the forests or near them. In my previous roles in the bank, I was working in the Africa East region. And there we have, for example, in Zambia, we have extensive forest program, and we've been working with the Zambian community forest management associations and model, and building a system or supporting the government to build a system where communities are the formal custodians of natural forests, where they really benefit from the resources, benefit the fruits of their labor in the forests. And one interesting example is that just a few weeks ago, in the eastern province of Zambia, the first carbon credits from community forestry were recognized. They are still trying to figure out how to sell them. It's so fresh that they are still identifying buyers for those carbon credits, and that will be a multi-million transfer of resources to these communities and local authorities in Eastern Province, showing that engaging communities in sustainable management, giving them the mandate, both responsibility and mandate to manage those resources, show that the communities can benefit greatly from those forests. And I think the overall arching in addition to multifunctionality, is the issue of building forest economies. That was introduced in the Global Challenge Program for Forests, Biodiversity, Landscape. It's a very long name.
Nature.
And nature, yes. And a kind of guiding principle that we have to recognize the role of forests in building resilient local economies. And that includes involving communities, like I said, engaging local and central national authorities, but also the private sector. And finding the right ways, the sustainable ways of building job-creating forest economies. And we are still waiting for our colleague from IFC who can perhaps build more on the private sector angle. But even the very small holder, I mean small and medium-sized enterprises, sorry, they are essential. When you travel in the countryside in Zambia, you notice that there are kind of these one-person micro-enterprises processing locally produced wood for local markets, and both sawn wood, fuel wood, you name it, charcoal, and it kind of shows that there's a vibrant local forest economy being built based on local resource, creating local employment and creating local economic benefits. So these are the kind of general principles in the bank group when we look at how to engage in the forest sector. But obviously these are kind of general global principles. Solutions are local and they need to be adjusted to the local realities.
Thank you, Tuka. And in the next round, we will go back to and this is also a question for the IFC. Thank you, Tuka. Now, this is also a question for the IFC colleague. Is like, how do large-scale forestry projects align with the development goals, such as the projects that we had been raising up? And now I will turn it over to Sergio Baffoni from EPN. Sergio, from your research, what are some of the key environmental and social impacts of the large-scale forestry plantations that you have identified? And can you share some examples of your work? And can you propose kind of like some of the ideas that you, working alongside with communities, have to suggest here when designing projects, forestry projects in the sector?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Carolina, and thank you for having me. Environmental Paper Network is a network of environmental organizations. I'm now joining from Brazil with a nasty job to talk about industrial forest plantations, and with to bring very simple news. They are a serious problem for 4 reasons. Because despite being presented as reforestation, they actually fuel deforestation, they complete deforestation, they drain landscapes, and they promote large-scale fires. So that's a serious problem. It's not very intuitive because normally we don't see industrial pulp and paper industry where deforestation is happening. For a very simple reason, this is a very high technological industry that needs reliable infrastructures. But by systematically expanding as soon as infrastructures arrive into cattle ranching land, they push this business towards deforestation front. Actually, let's focus a little bit on the Cerrado because it's also an area that has seen tangible support by development finance. There is, according to a scientific study, despite cattle ranching has pushed has expanded into the Cerrado by deforesting for 20 years, their production output actually it's more or less stable. What has been expanded is eucalyptus, soy, and sugar cane. So those 3 commodities fuel deforestation by pushing the ranchers towards deforestation and actually acting as instigator. Now, despite crudity of deforestation, actually in the Cerrado, a pasture looks like a mixed regenerating environment because the deep-rooted vegetation of Cerrado keep reproducing even after fire, but they cannot reproducing after deep plowing. And deep plowing is the first action of establishing, developing a plantation. And another things about fire and water, Cerrado is called the cradle of the waters because it's here originates the majority of subcontinent hydrologic basins, because the Cerrado vegetation has this capacity to capture moisture from the atmosphere and storing down into the ground. However, it's been substituted with a plant which has the opposite specialization, eucalyptus, which has been intensively used to drain unwanted swamps. The result is exacerbation of drought, which in time of climate change, it's a very irresponsible land management. And actually springs, rivers, and streams disappear soon after, and affecting local communities' agriculture, affecting remaining forest stands. So this is a serious problem. And when there is drought, there is also fire, especially in presence of extended stock of homogeneous food stand that works like fuel. And especially if this is by eucalyptus, which is an extremely fire-friendly plant that in its natural environment in Australia live with fire, needs fire, promotes fire, but brought outside, this effect is very dangerous. Another impact is agrochemicals applied normally by air spraying, either by drones or planes that go with the wind and affects the surrounding environment, local communities, agriculture, which get poison and the natural environment. Now, all those impacts are actually multiplied by the cumulative effects. In the eastern corner of Mato Grosso do Sul, we have 6 huge pulp mill projects, either already built and working, or being built, or just planned, plus one more beyond the border of Paraguay. There is yet no cumulative impact assessment of all those projects, despite some of them receive support by development finance. Now the question is this the kind of development we want to see in place? Is this that actually it's a threat for the future, not just for the people, but also for the future development of the region? We believe that actually forests should be restored, not outrooted. And we believe that local communities that developed in centuries integrate agriculture and mixed agroforestry, like you see in the picture, the Babasu nut in Maranhão, should be supported by access to the market, by access to technology, by support and so on, instead of just simply removed as a wall to make space to expand in plantations. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio, just on time. So now I will turn it over to Benoit. Could you share the World Bank's broader vision on forestry, particularly in South America, and how does the World Bank see the role in both supporting conservation and development in forested regions? Also, please feel free to share some examples of the Amazonia Viva program that you are leading now.
Great. Thank you very much, Carolina, and to BIG for organizing this event. We're thrilled when there's an opportunity to put forests, on the front of the debate. And it's really so important worldwide, but including in Latin America and the Caribbean, where in the past couple of years there have been devastating forest fires, right? And we now see and better understand the positive or negative impacts that deforestation and forest degradation can have, not just for biodiversity, for carbon, for obviously all the forest-dependent peoples and populations that are there, but also now more and more for the local, regional, and global water cycles, right? So there is a strong evidence coming from the science panel for the Amazon that the loss of forests in the Amazon is causing or caused some of the blackouts and water shortages in the Andes. And of course, you know, there's impacts for agricultural potential for the La Plata basin to the south. So it's really important that we look at forests in the context of economic development and not just for conservation or climate preservation purposes. But let me just say that at the World Bank, we actually have quite an array of involvements in the forest sector in Latin America and beyond. So we get involved typically through our own lending, right, through the IBRD for middle-income countries and IDA for poorer countries. So we have operations there, and the Paraguay forestry project that you have referred to is financed by IBRD, so that's one example. There are quite a few more. We also have been very active now for the past at least 2 decades, since Tuka and I have been around here, through trust funds. The Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, the Biocarbon Fund, the Forest Investment Program. There's quite a range of them. The dedicated grant mechanism for, you know, focused on local communities and indigenous peoples. And now we are also getting involved, subject to a board decision later this month, in other global initiatives where we don't manage the money per se, but we facilitate, and that is the now, you've probably heard about the Tropical Forest Forever facility. So, and I haven't mentioned, of course, the IFC. I guess Anoop is going to show up at some point, but IFC has its own engagements. Now, Tuka mentioned very quickly earlier the Global Challenge program on forests. And in this context, we are trying to not shift away from conservation, but include the jobs dimension, really the economic development dimension and jobs in particular. As you know, this is a corporate priority. And there are good examples of how forestry can really stimulate employment. In this region, we have great experience in Mexico. I don't know if there's anybody from Mexico here, but very good. You know, where CONAFOR and with support from IBRD, IDB, other partners, has really invested in small and medium enterprises in areas that are also predominantly indigenous and where women take a great part. So you really achieve various economic benefits as well as environmental ones. Now, in the Amazon, together with IDB, and I want to recognize Tatiana Shore in the back there, we have launched an initiative called Amazonia Viva, very much in partnership, or if you like, under the umbrella initiative of Amazon Forever by IDB, where also we recognize the importance of improving the livelihoods and economic development opportunities in the Amazon. So we have 3 pillars: the green, the prosperous, and the livable. And it's about, in a forest biome, creating opportunities not just for conservation, but also for better jobs, more sustainable agriculture, more access to basic services and infrastructure, and not infrastructure that destroys forests, but infrastructure that is forest friendly. So more river transport and multimodal transport, for example. But there's an unbelievable need for digital connectivity, for energy. I mean, the living standards are so far below the national averages. And what is true in the Amazon is very much true in Central America. I was in Panama recently, and in the indigenous comarcas, for example, Gunayala, poverty levels are 15 times higher than the national average, and these happen to be areas that are forest rich. And so, you need to create access to markets, employment, access to health, access to education, in the context of an overall conservation and forest protection policy. So this is really what we're trying to do. We have opportunities in Brazil now to do a whole lot more. There's nope. To do a whole lot more together with IFC and MIGA. What you will see is that there's going to be, I think, a whole compound of activities. In some cases, there will be plantations. In some cases, there will be restoration. As Sergio was mentioning, the headwaters of the Amazon are actually oftentimes in the Cerrado, right? And you need to protect these headwaters by helping the Brazilian Forest Service restore these areas which are very degraded, and even private landowners are not in compliance with their legal obligations to maintain, forest area along the river. So this is a huge need. And there's also opportunities for improving the ecological connectivity amongst protected areas. So I think Brazil is showing great leadership. I hope other countries will do the same in the Amazon basin. But you will see it's not just forestry plantations and monoculture. Those kinds of activities may make sense in some specific conditions, not the kind of photos that we saw from Sergio, where you indeed destroy actually the native vegetation to put in fast growth, monocultural plantations necessarily, but in the landscape, you have a variety of activities that may make sense. Thanks.
No, thank you, Benoit, and you just made the perfect connection to a transition, because here, between what our colleagues Sergio, Omar, and Jessica are presenting, and the perspective of the World Bank Group, the idea is, I think we all agree on this, is minimize negative impacts and maximize all the type of projects that would benefit the forests and improve development opportunities for communities in those local areas. So I will encourage that we discuss that in the second round. I will push you to get into those discussions. So now I will turn it over to my colleague Omar from Paraguay. He's from the Centro de Estudios Genioy. And Omar, I would love if you could share from the perspective of your work in Paraguay, what are the main impacts that communities are seeing in the Sustainable Forestry Project, and how these plantations affect the natural habitats, biodiversity, and local communities, and how these communities are seeing their own solutions or alternatives to this type of scale industrial forestry project. That would be very interesting to have your perspective on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Carolina. Good afternoon. Many thanks to the organization. My name is Omar Yampey. I'm the executive director of the Centro de Estudios Genioy, Paraguay. Okay. From the perspective in Paraguay, the so-called Sustainable Forestry Project promoted by the World Bank raises serious concerns about its real environmental and social impact. The project provides financing for about 50,000 new hectares of plantation and aims to expand the national forestry area to millions of hectares by 2030. This expansion is justified as a way to generate jobs and economic growth, but in reality, the jobs created are few, temporary, and precarious. While the bank claims to promote sustainable forestry and economic growth, in the practice, this expansion of tree plantation will bring multiple risks for biodiversity, water resources, and rural communities in the eastern region of Paraguay. Instead of supporting a small-scale, community-based forestry, the project mainly benefits big investors and agribusiness groups. In the eastern region, less than 10% of native forests remain. This area has already suffered massive deforestation due to shade and cattle expansion. Now, industrial plantations are being introduced into these degraded landscapes, supposedly to restore them. However, monoculture plantations are not forests. They replace the remaining natural vegetation, reduce biodiversity, and alter local ecosystem. Eucalyptus trees, for example, consume large amounts of water, degrade soils, and leave very little habitat for native species. This leads to further fragmentation and isolation of protected areas. In short, what is presented as reforestation often means more ecological degradation. The risks are both environmental and social. For biodiversity, for biodiversity, the spread of monoculture means less variety of plant and animals, less water availability, and more soil degradation. For local communities, these projects can mean the loss of land and livelihoods. Many rural and indigenous families depend on small-scale agriculture, forests, and rivers for their survival. When plantation expands, they often displace these families or restrict their access to natural resources. This can increase poverty and social inequality, especially in areas that already suffer from land concentration and weak land tenure systems. The forestry sector is often presented as a source of employment, but most jobs in industrial plantation are seasonal, low-paid, and mechanized. This means they do not offer long-term stability or decent working conditions. Moreover, the expansion of large-scale plantation can cause social conflict over land ownership and environmental impacts. If communities are not properly consulted, these projects can generate resistance and protest. The lack of clear communication, transparency, and participation increases the risk of social tension, as seen in other countries like Brazil and Chile, where similar forestry models have led to deep local conflicts. Finally, local communities often see this sustainable project with skepticism. From their perspective, such projects accelerate the concentration of land and limit their access to water, forests, and fertile soil. The benefits tend to go to large companies, while small farmers and indigenous people are left with fewer resources. In Paraguay, land inequality is already one of the worst in the world. Expanding industrial plantation without addressing this problem will only make it worse. Many community members and organizations are now demanding alternative approach, those that prioritize food sovereignty, biodiversity conservation, and fair access to natural resources.
Okay, thank you, Omar. It's really interesting to hear what is happening in the specific situation of Paraguay. Now, we would like to share a video from that Instituto Mayra prepared, also with communities, sharing also some environmental and social concerns from the perspective of Quilombola communities in Brazil, and then we will turn it over to Anup. And then for the second round, since we have just a couple of minutes left, we can go on some questions, but also I would like to ask to the panelists to feel free to react to any of the things that are appearing in any of the presentations that anyone is doing. The idea is to push for broader discussion and think together alternatives, ideas, and how to push for better forest projects. So we turn the video.
Excuse me. No, we don't have audio.
Comunidades quilombolas, nós da Coque Vale, que é a Comissão das Comunidades Quilombola do Vale de Jequitinhonha. Estamos aqui hoje, vou até mostrar para vocês o tanto de eucalipto, plantação de eucalipto que nós estamos tendo aqui na região. E nós recebemos várias reclamações dos moradores, das pessoas que precisam da água e não está tendo água. Então é uma preocupação.
Eu sou da comunidade quilombola, sou quilombo. A falta de respeito que a Peran está tendo com a comunidade quilombola. Empresa querendo tomar as terras dos quilombos, né? Trazendo pistoleiro armado também para amedrontar as pessoas para sair das terras.
Nasci aqui na comunidade, falando aí sobre a Peran, trouxe muita dificuldade para nós, que antes nós tínhamos muita água, com a chegada do eucalipto, hoje nós não temos água, nós teve que acabar com as criações, porque não tinha fumo, não tinha água, nós não planta horta.
Essa Peran chegou aqui, nós tínhamos o piqui, nós tínhamos tudo quanto é fruta, nós não tem ela mais, né? Então eles recuou nós. Então nós estamos afastados.
Sou de uma comunidade quilombola, sou quilombo. Tive um problema de saúde em 2011. Hoje eu sou transplantei em 2011. A gente pede um comparecer dos médicos perguntando o que está causando tanto problema de rinhas hoje em dia. A única coisa que eles relatam pra gente é veneno.
Sou quilombola, né? Sou da comunidade quilombola que trabalho com apicultura. E as minhas abelhas estão tendo um problema com veneno. As empresas batem nas lavouras delas, né? E aí causa contaminação no mel, né? A gente fez um laudo lá do mel e deu contaminação no mel. Já tem a prova que fez o laudo do mel lá e deu contaminação de veneno que eles batem nas lavouras deles, que causa, prejudica até as que não estão na colmeia, né?
Okay. Thank you, Instituto Mayra, for preparing that video. And again, I just want to highlight, before turning on to Anup, the idea is not to discuss around this specific project, but the idea was to show kind of some of the impacts and how we can discuss here in the panel the challenges that we need to address as banks, civil society, communities, etc., all together. So I will invite Anup to share with us, and welcome, thank you for being here. From the perspective of the IFC, what is the climate and carbon rationale for supporting plantation forestry projects, and how do you see these projects contributing to regional development in Latin America in general, or globally as well? Feel free to chime in on that. Thank you.
Thank you, and apologies for being a little bit late, coming from another session. Look, I think, for those of you who don't know me, I've spent quite a few years in the climate space, looking at pathways of how we can get to some of our climate targets. And when we looked at the forestry space, it seemed like a solution if done well, if done managed well. And that's the important part, right? If managed well. Because if you look at any of the industries that we have, steel, cement, others, they have a high footprint. And I'm just coming from the session on agribusiness. Agribusiness has a high footprint. And so how do you actually address poverty, which is more predominant in rural areas, at the same time have sustainable development? And this is where we believe forestry, if done well, can play an extremely important role. And if you look at some of the advancements that were being made, I was surprised at one point to learn building codes are being changed in France to allow for more wood to be used in that. We use paper every morning, evening, wherever we go to the bathroom, at dinner, wherever we use paper all the time. So the demand for wood is not going down in any shape or form, unless we have another alternative. And we don't have that. We're moving away from plastics. We're moving away from the more polluting industries and trying to put more on paper. For that, you need plantations. You can recycle paper, you can get some of the trash and convert it, but there's only so much capacity there. So without wood, we don't have an alternative. If somebody has an alternative, I'm happy to learn more about it, but that is a pathway for us. And so when we look at forestry projects, we are looking for viable, sustainable projects that do not have the negative impacts that we talk about, or we manage the negative impacts. So many of you may or may not be aware of our performance standards, and we have specific performance standards, listening to the video earlier, on free and FPIC, free, prior, informed consent. So when we look at projects, we make sure local communities, IP, indigenous populations are consulted, and there's a discussion that happens to address any concerns. We look at the water impacts on a project. So the community impact, the water project. So if you're not familiar, I encourage you to look at how rigorous we are in our performance standards when we look at projects. So for us, the goal is then to support these kind of viable projects that can allow us to support the wood and the forestry sector, because that's what we need. In some cases, it's used for building materials, some cases for paper products. In other cases, it may be for boiler fuel. And this is where we often have discussions internally. Today, we don't have low emission intensive technologies on the steel side, on the cement side. They're just emerging. The electric arc furnace, for example, is in steel is only for recycled steel, and it's just coming around right now, and we don't have it at scale. We've actually invested in a company, the startup, that is working on some of these new technologies, but we don't have that today. So in that interim, when you want to transition boiler fuels, because the fundamental part of manufacturing and most of these industries is having fuel to run boilers that produce a certain level of heat. And you can't do that with other sources. And so when you want to replace it with something else, it's wood and wood-based charcoal. That's more. So you have a trade-off. Do you want coal or wood-based charcoal? And to my mind, and when we look at the science behind it, we look at the impact behind this, you can see that the wood-based charcoal is much better for our planet during this transition as we come up with new technologies to address this. So our approach to is really to find strong partners that we can then work with and manage these negative effects that come with knowing that the ultimate goal is to reduce those emissions overall and put us all on a trajectory to reduce emissions and produce the products that we are asking more and more of. We want to replace plastic everywhere with paper. There is no other way to do it but with this, with the wood. So I could go on this, but I want to emphasize, we do not support projects that remove native forests to put these commercial plantations. I want to be clear on that. We do not support projects. We work with partners that have degraded lands, and we've from the commercial forestry side, we've also invested in a fund that is looking at both native trees as well as commercial plantations. So it's a new model, and I'm happy to talk about it more, but essentially carbon credits have enabled that. Once you begin to monetize what is a good out there, public good, and you find a way to do that, then you have new business models that can emerge that can reduce the impact on forests and on soil and the environment, right? And here we're giving a value to that environment with those carbon credits, and therefore able to create new business models that I'm happy to talk about. Let me pause there. Thank you.
No, wonderful. Thank you, Anup. And just let me take an attribution as a panelist just to mention that I think that many people here knows what the strong performance standards that you have. The problem is that we always identify an implementation gap, and that is why some of the concerns that communities such as the Quilombola communities were raising is sometimes there is a huge implementation gap between what is required on paper and what is happening on the ground. And now, now we have some questions, but I would like to continue with Tuka and see, Sergio, I will give you the floor in a minute. I would follow up with Tuka, and I would invite you, if you want to react to any of the things that were said so far, it would be great because it would encourage a little bit the dialogue. And also, if you could let us know, like, how does the bank frame forestry within broader agendas such as the energy transition or economic diversification, and how the bank used to define, what criteria does the bank use to define sustainable forestry? Thank you.
Thanks. I think the debate on how to define sustainable forestry has been going on since, 18th century, and we still haven't reached the kind of the real simple answer for that. But I think it's kind of very important that we recognize the intergenerational aspect, and that basically that when you manage forests sustainably, the environmental services, social services, and economic services can be maintained generation after generation. And I refer to both tree generations and human generations. I remember years ago there was a kind of advert by I think it was WWF, which said that forests used wisely can be used forever. And I think kind of that summarizes it, that the forests can be used, but they need to be used wisely, and that allows us to work on this based on wood-based products, and kind of building on Anup's point on building this kind of forest economy and material substitution. And you refer to the case in France. And if in the EU, if they maximized use of wood, sustainably produced wood in construction within the EU, it would be the same as removing 12 million petrol-powered vehicles from the roads. 12 million vehicles. If we just maximized, or the Europeans maximized the use of sustainable wood in their construction. And the technology is already there. There are kind of some products where, bioplastics and whatever the right term is, where they are more like, still development, scientific, laboratory stage. But for packaging, construction, etc., we have the knowledge, we have the products to make real transformation in our production and consumption patterns based on wood-based materials to make it more carbon and climate friendly. And I think that's kind of the big picture, big kind of vision we should have both in bank client countries, but also rest of the world. And this requires is sustainable production forestry. It's simply that we need well-managed, well-done production forestry in right types of places. And that's a kind of the point that we have to look at the whole value chain of forest sector management, not only forest management, but forest sector management, that we have the right policies, right incentives, we get rid of perverse incentives in agriculture, transport, energy, you name it, governance, and then also technical forest management, land use planning, having a mosaic approach to landscapes and so forth, identifying which areas are high biodiversity value areas, which need to be protected for the sake of protecting biodiversity. But then there are also areas, degraded lands, etc., where we can have well-planned sustainable production forestry, which then produces the raw material for renewable, sustainable, carbon-friendly, climate-friendly raw material for production and consumption. And energy. We have to recognize that, for example, in Africa, 70% of people depend on wood-based energy. And I would assume, 70%, when I saw the number, I was a bit surprised. I thought it's higher, but it must be that it includes urban areas where the percentage is low. But in rural areas, it's even much higher. And it's not only environmental issue, but it's also a health issue. That making sure that the household energy, not only industrial energy, but also household energy, is sustainable and well managed. And that's a kind of important aspect for the well-being of. But like said, I just repeat myself, that it requires the right types of interventions, both at policy, governance, and technical forest management level.
No, thank you very much for that intervention, and I will give the floor to Sergio now to react also. And one of the questions that I have as a panelist that is coming to me as I hear all these things and these different visions in the panel is like how we can sustain sustainable production forestry, how we can do that and make it happen, for example, in cases where cumulative impact assessments are not validated or take it into account with different projects that are promoting industrial forestry. So that's one of the things that I'm thinking as I'm coordinating the panel, and yeah, some of the things that I think we all should be thinking as banks, civil society, and working on that. And I will turn it over to Sergio now, that I know that he has some reactions, and yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, I think using forests sustainably in order to use it together is a fantastic quote. It's really is the key, is the core of everything. The problem is that forests are not infinite. We actually, to quote another WWF piece, we globally are already using more forest output than the capacity of the forest to reproduce it globally. So be careful. Let's be careful about the issue of quantity. There is no more free wood for everybody. So we have to be careful. And definitely there is a huge difference between forests and plantations, because trees are trees, but trees are not necessarily forests. So if you plant a forest, you have a negative carbon process, and that's for sure. But if you plant something that you cut in 5 years, honestly, I doubt about this negativity. If you plant something that is being burned and go back into the atmosphere, emitting more CO2 than the same quantity of coal, like scientists says us, it's not so negative in terms of carbon. If you use it to produce paper products that like packaging that go back into the trash within the first day of use by the final consumers and go back into the atmosphere, is not so negative in terms of coal. And sorry, I disagree that there is no other way than to having material substitution from plastic to paper. Honestly, there is a thriving industry of reusing packaging, for example, that is there and just need to be supported to get on scale. But it's working well. So this issue that there are no other ways, I would be careful, because there are other ways. And the thing is that we have to reduce, especially on wasteful applications like the packaging, we have to reduce what we use by using smart technological improvements that would allow us to impact less on the forest resources, because the forests are on the brink. They are not infinite. And I would insist on this. And So, and of course, if you plant an implantation, you accelerate the production, but you also accelerate the impacts and the devastation, and that's not forest. So, let's try to go beyond what it's assumed as the only way, and let's look for other solutions, because there is a plenty of them, and they are at reach, and we can work together. And
Thank you, Sergio. And you just made the perfect transition to Jessica from Instituto Mayra. She prepared the video that we saw. And Jessica, I would love to hear from you. How can development finance shift to support the solutions that communities themselves are already advancing, alternatives that would let them thrive, and while also protecting forest and promoting real forest development? Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Jessica Holz here from Instituto Mayra in Brazil. We are an NGO focusing on social and environmental rights. So thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the question as well. So development finance can only truly support sustainable solutions when it begins by listening, not only to the consultants or the corporations, but to the communities who live and care for this land. It seems simple, but it's not simple. The question is, who's paying the highest price for this world that we are building? In the Jequitinhonha Valley that you've seen in the video, here in Brazil, Afro-descendant communities have developing their own answers to the climate crisis for generation through agroecology, collective land management, and protection of their water source. But too often, development finance institutions still operate with a colonial logic. They fund large-scale projects that extract value from territories, while describing this project as a green investment. When banks like EFC supports monoculture of eucalyptus or mining projects in the name of this energy transition or sustainability, they reproduce the same violence that they claim to overcome. So to shift this model, development finance must move from financing projects to financing process of autonomy. That means redirection source towards community-led initiatives, though they have restored forests instead of replacing them, that can regenerate water system instead of draining them, that strengthen local economies instead of destroying them. It also means strengthening mechanism for the direct participation of these people in this process, where people can say no to some kind of projects that can threat their way of living. So for this shift, it requires courage from the institutions to question the language of neutrality and the illusion that profit and justice can coexist without conflict. It means understanding that the real development is not measured by carbon credits, but by flourishing of this territory. And we have many cases that we can talk about in the Jequitinhonha Valley and in these other territories as well. These communities are already building the future. So this institution can support in this way of finding in this territory, how can they push forward the business they already have, and how can they implement process that they not destroy their livelihood.
Thank you, Jessica. And I mean, what I see here is so oftentimes it seems like many of the things that you are already mentioning, in some way, the World Bank is already doing them because of the things that Benoit and Tuka were mentioning, the type of the DGM, the type of community sustainable forest practice, etc. But my question here, and maybe to Benoit, what lessons is the bank drawing from its current portfolio that could shape the future forestry investments to support most of those kind of positive and impactful projects in forests and for communities?
Thanks very much. So let me try to answer these questions and also at the same time react to some of the things we've heard. So first of all, I would like to echo what Anup said about, the so-called safeguard instruments, if you like, or the environmental and social risk management frameworks that institutions like IFC, the World Bank, IBRD, IDB have, right? And including for this Paraguay project, these instruments are under preparation. They will be disclosed, and there's a process of consultation and public reaction. So in particular, and this goes to Jessica's point just now, the instruments that have to do with the participation, the engagement, the stakeholder engagement plan, the environmental and social commitment plan, these are key instruments, right, that need to be written well, disseminated well, consulted upon, and obviously then implemented, right? And we're humans, we make mistakes, and so then there are accountability mechanisms, there are grievance redress mechanisms that are put in place that need to exist and be robust, so that when somebody has a question, somebody has a concern, somebody wants to complain about an impact, they can turn to these grievance redress mechanisms. So when a project is put together, you have the substance of the project, and then you have mechanisms to safeguard people and nature from negative impacts. Another lesson that we have learned is that doing the right thing in this space takes time, and it's not cheap. But it mostly takes time, right? So working with quilombolas, working with indigenous peoples, you have to respect their timelines for decision making. Obtaining free, prior, and informed consent is not an overnight thing. And so before the ground is broken or the first stone is laid, typically it takes a long time of engagement, right, for these people on the ground, whether they're indigenous or Afro-descendant, to be fully on board. And as Jessica said, I mean, that is really key to the quality of the development and the sustainability of the investments, is how much buy-in there is, right? How much ownership. Now, in terms of the financial innovations, there's quite a number of things that are going on that are fairly new. Carbon finance is still amongst them. I mentioned the TFFF. I hope that TFFF will see the light of day at COP30, and that will be a major incentive for doing the right thing, for protecting and restoring forests. And by the way, there's a mechanism inside of it that stipulates that 20% of the payouts to countries will go directly to indigenous peoples and local communities. So that's a major development. In Peru, there's now, and in various other countries, there's now indigenous Red Plus, which is actually happening. It was a big battle years ago, and now you have groups that are engaged, and the World Bank is supporting Grupo Peru in particular. We have incentives now in the World Bank to cut the cost of borrowing. It's called the Framework for Financial Incentives. You have green bonds. So there's a number of ways to do the right thing and cut the cost of these good projects. And then finally is the power of partnerships. And I mean partnerships. I don't want to pay lip service to partnerships. Of course, we have the partnership within the World Bank Group, which is not straightforward, by the way, but our senior leadership is really pushing us, and there is no going back. So that's an obvious one. The partnership between IDB and the IDB Group and the World Bank Group on the Amazon has been very important. Also, a new thing. We weren't used to doing this. But I also mean the partnership with civil society and indigenous peoples and Afro-descendants. And that has actually, it's taken me some time to figure this out myself, right? Because when I started in this business, again, Tuca and I, Gonzalo was in the the inspection panel by then as well. We tended to consider indigenous peoples as an object of safeguards, and basically the topic of risk. And what I think now we're moving, in this direction to consider indigenous peoples as strategic allies, and that turns the relationship on its head. We need them; they need us. They need the state. We need the state. I think there's a triangular strategic relationship between international cooperation, the state, and people on the ground. And if we can prove that this can work, I think it's a completely different ballgame, the way that we design and implement projects.
Thank you, Benoit. And it's good to hear that approach has changed instead of object of risk to actual partners. That's something that groups have been asking for many years, and basically is a discussion around their rights, not partners. Is respecting their rights and their territories, the territories that they had protected for so many years. And now I would turn it to Anup. Please be brief. So I just want to know if you would like to comment on how the IFC is incorporating lessons learned from projects and the challenges into new ideas, innovations, and looking ahead, how do you envision the IFC role in shaping, more positive forestry models that balance economic, environmental, and social goals? And please be brief. Thank you, because I want to open the floor for questions.
Sure, I'll be very brief. So, look, I'll give you just two examples on that. In one of our forestry projects, the client went over and above to expand the riparian areas around the water bodies, so that for better water management and, of course, the flora and fauna to flourish by increasing those riparian areas. So, instead of having the standard, they kind of doubled the area, and that way, you can also create a pathway for animals in that area that can traverse through those parts. This was an innovation. Say, okay, let's look at biodiversity. Yes, you have this plantation. How can you incorporate elements of biodiversity in it? The second big innovation, and I touched on it briefly, that carbon credits are enabling. One of the projects we're looking at, literally the entire landmass is, half of it is going to be protected as native forests, and the other half is going to be the commercial plantation. So, and instead of using majority of the area for commercial plantation, they've kind of made it half and half. And the managed forests and this is where I was out at a nursery in Brazil visiting. They're developing native species out there, so that these can be restored and the forest can be restored and left alone to rejuvenate. And you're right, trees are not forests, and we recognize that. And that's where we want to sort of support different species that were native to that place, have them planted in that area, and sort of that becomes a conservation area. And the other part can have the plantation that is commercial plantation. What enables that? Carbon credits. Because there's a potential source of revenue. When you buy that land, you're buying the entire 50,000 or 100,000 hectares. And so if you want to get productive use as an investor from it, you can't leave half of it to conservation. But if you have a way to monetize it, which is through these carbon credits, then you can have a whole different business model that says, hey, we don't need to do that, and you don't cut, and you reduce pressure on native forests. That's the important part. Today, we have deforestation for agribusiness, for forestry, and if we don't have other solutions, that deforestation will continue. And that is the biggest challenge we have today. While we're discussing issues around plantation and how we manage these issues better, the bigger issue is this deforestation that we're all saying, right? And to get to a solution for that, we do need the managed plantations to help us address those issues.
Wonderful, perfect timing. And thank you. And now I would like to open the floor for questions, reactions. Also, feel free to chime in into the discussion that we're trying to promote here in this panel. Yes, over there.
Thank you so much. Rebecca Aberg, Inclusive Engagement International. One of the things that multiple panelists mention is the importance of FPIC, that free, prior, and informed consent. And thinking about how there are always power dynamics between the partners that are part of the process. What happens, what does World Bank Group do, and maybe the answers are different for different parts of the bank, when those partners say, no, we don't want to have a project? What does your process look like when you encounter that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who wants to take this one? Oh, maybe we take more questions, if there are, and then, over there. We'll take another question. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I'm Gabriela from Amazonia Impact Ventures. We're a fund that invests in the Amazonian agribusiness. My question is around non-timber forest products and what role does the World Bank see this playing within the Amazonia Viva strategy? Thank you.
Well, I think we can start responding until someone else asks another question. So, you can start. Please be brief.
Very good. Look, on FPIC, it's a tough one, but basically, if there's no consent, there shouldn't be a project, right? Now, consent doesn't mean unanimous agreement by every single person, right? It's a qualitative assessment. So the FPIC, the consent has to be given by the people, the community, and they will decide whether amongst them, if there's still debate, there's still consent or not. So there's all sorts of scenarios that are possible, but basically, if there's no consent, there should not be a project. When FPIC is mandated and FPIC is not given, there should be no project. That's the short answer. On non-timber forest products. In fact, this is a really interesting one, right? The bioeconomy is such an interesting space with lots of potential. I'm looking again at Tatiana because, of course, IDB launched a big bioeconomy program as part of Amazon Forever. Likewise, in fact, it's the IFC in this case, together with IDB Invest, have taken, have lent to Natura in Brazil, which is a major bioeconomy producer. We went to visit their plant, one of their plants near Belém, and it was quite spectacular what they do with nature projects. So it goes so much now further beyond than the raw acai berries, right? You have value chains that are developing that are quite incredible, and so that is very much part of it. Now, how much this can grow and at what cost? It's not easy, right? Because the communities are so dispersed, and it takes forever to bring the produce to market. You need cold storage. You need digital connectivity. So there's a whole infrastructure agenda that is linked to the development of the bioeconomy in a forest-friendly kind of manner. It's fascinating. It is very much part of Amazonia Viva.
Yeah.
On the NTFP issue, well, I haven't had a chance to work in the Amazonia, but for example, the example I gave from Zambia, and there the NTFPs were precisely the main source of monetary benefit from the community forests, because it's not the harvest, it's not harvesting wood production, but strengthening the non-timber forest production by the communities was the very key that increased the community's interest in the forest resource, and that was the trigger. It was not that you can protect the forest against fires or you can harvest. It was that they felt empowered to have, beehives, you name it, all these kind of products. And that was the immediate, because compared to many forest products, the cash flow is more or less immediate from those products. If you plant even a short rotation, you have to wait for several years. And there may be a fire just before the final harvest, and everything is gone. But with NTFPs, you get the cash revenue and employment immediately. And that was the main driver in Zambian community forestry. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I don't know if there are more questions. I just want to mention one comment regarding FPIC. In one of the projects that we mentioned here, Paracel specifically, we saw when trying to apply FPIC, there are challenges, but the main problem here is it was that the way in which the bank and the client decided, not the bank, it's an IDB Invest project, just to clarify, but the way in which they defined the direct area of impact, leaving aside specific criteria, left or excluded some of the communities from the FPIC process that that will be impacted by the project. And that is a huge problem, and we're still trying to deal with that and talking to the bank and talking to the community. So FPIC, it's never an easy process. And yeah, it's an ongoing process from the inception of the project throughout the entire project. And I want to ask if there are more questions. Yes.
Thank you. Sam McManus from Uxalo Development Finance. I'm just hearing, to be frankly honest, just a bit of a disconnect between the sort of thoughts and opinions from the multilateral development banks, who I completely sympathise with and feel that these projects are really important, and then the people on the ground, so to speak, who are dialing in virtually. It sounds like there is some disconnect between the projects on paper and then what's happening with the communities, and we're listening to what you're saying. Is there a way that once a project has started, you could then go back and listen? You mentioned a mechanism, and new mechanisms are coming into place, where you really listen and then maybe say, let's look at this again. Let's maybe work with the communities a bit on a deeper level and address some of these issues. Thank you.
Sorry, we will take another question and then you can respond.
My question is a follow-up on that. I also want to echo to Tuka's point on both social, environment, and economic are all very crucial elements for the sustainable forestry. And I'm curious, in the case of Paraguay, where the negative impact has where there's a negative impact, what might be the follow-up actions from the bank and the country's level to mitigate that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Anup, you want to take the first question? Maybe. Yeah.
Sure, and I find the two questions a little bit related. So look, when we do a project and we have our social environment assessment, we come up with a plan on the gaps to be addressed. So to your point, there's an environment social action plan that's in the public domain. And just recently, we've done an agribusiness project in Mongolia, and the civil society member followed up. Hey, Anup, is there an update to that environment social action plan that you guys had put out there? Has the company achieved it? And we had our environment social specialist visit the site, check on the progress, and then put out an updated note. So we do have a way to monitor from the initial assessment, identifying the gaps, developing that plan, and then acting on that, working with the company to address those challenges. And sometimes it's in the gap between the lip and the cup is where the implementation, like what went wrong, what's happening, the client committed to doing certain things, what challenges did they face? And in implementing those. So then we have to work with them if they were genuinely, working on it or not, and then we push them. And there have been extreme cases where we've had to say, look, thank you so much, we don't see eye to eye, you pay us back our loan and we are out of this project. There have been instances like that. But we try to work with partners who are willing to take that journey and address the challenges that we face.
No, thank you. And Jessica, she wants also to respond to some or to add some bits here to the response.
I would like to make a question. So I heard here it's been said that it takes time about the FPIC process with the communities, and I completely understand that it takes a lot of time. But from one case that we are working in, the company, it's about 40 years in the same territory, and they are not achieving any kind of communication that it's really trustful with the communities. So how long it's acceptable for this implementation of this FPIC process?
Thank you very much, Jessica. I don't know who wants to respond, maybe.
Maybe just to complement what Anoop said earlier. So and in answer to your question, so typically, as Anoop mentioned, there'll be a project team that supervises, right, or follows a project implementation. In the World Bank, we have a standard that there is like 2 supervision events per year, and they look at all the aspects, including the social and environmental aspects and the risks. And you know, in addition to the project manager, there are environmental and social specialists who visit the project sites. So then, in addition, when there is an issue, there's a grievance redress system, which includes, depending on the institution, different levels. And then ultimately there's an accountability mechanism called the inspection panel in the World Bank. And the thinking is that through the combination of these 3 levels, if you like, of monitoring and supervision, you address the issues. And sometimes you don't, and sometimes there's a disaster and it doesn't end well, or the project closes early. But, you know, I don't know if it's most of the time, but a lot of projects actually do complete their objectives and provide good environmental and social outcomes. I don't know exactly which case Jessica was referring to, but it sounds pretty unfortunate, and I'm sure that in 40 years things should have happened. Yes.
So now the project that Jessica mentioned is APERAM, the one that IFC is supporting, but the engagement of IFC haven't been for 40 years. So it's recent, but how? A follow-up question is, like, IFC and development banks are supposed to add value in terms of financial additionality and environmental and social additionality. So a question to be raised here is how the banks are adding additionality in these type of projects where there is already a consolidated relationship between a company and communities and their environment, that is a destroyed forest and replaced by monoculture plantations. I leave this question here, but I know that Marco has one question and Omar, he has a conclusions. I just want to add if there is any other question here in the room. Okay, so I turn it to Marco to ask a question, and then we close with Omar.
Very short. I'm just curious about the type of coordination that you do as a group in the World Bank. And there's not a specific strategy for forestry. And we also realize from your documents that there's an ambiguity when it comes to plantations and forestry. And it's used either term in the way of conservation and also plantations completely. You interchange those, and they're not the same. So my question is about the strategy behind this. Are you planning to release some document explaining what your actuaries are going to do, are going to be in the future? Are you planning to involve civil society in that vision that you have? And specifically for the Latin American region, understand how many projects can you actually implement? Because it seems like this capacity of the system is actually seeing its boundaries. but we're not seeing a limitation to the number of projects that you're approving and supporting as an MDB ecosystem. Not only you, but also the IDB as well.
Thank you, Mario. Marco, I don't know who wants to respond. Please be brief, the only question.
Yeah, a couple
Thank you.
of points, and then Benoit, probably the Latin America portfolio question. So we don't, at the moment, like you said, a bank or bank group doesn't have a forest strategy. We launched 2 years ago, or roughly 2 years ago, the Global Challenge Program for Forests, Landscapes, and Nature, Biodiversity. It's very long name, which it's not a strategy, but it's a kind of a quasi-strategy. It's an approach paper. It defines the key topics and issues and way we work in the forest sector. It was very much an internal process to kind of exactly to increase the coherence of bank groups' engagement in the sector, making sure that what colleagues at IFC are doing, what we do in the bank, what regions do, different regions, Africa, Latin America, South Asia, that there's a kind of a common narrative behind that engagement. And I would kind of one point that as a kind of very recent change and which will increase that coherence further is the whole Unified Knowledge Bank agenda, where the kind of the global advisory work by IFC and the banks, the IBRD side of the bank, that our global engagement knowledge work are all put under one roof. And that will kind of enhance the opportunities and possibilities and internal mechanisms for kind of bringing the kind of the common vision, common approach, and to the forest sector, and making sure that there's a kind of proper value chain from the kind of upstream engagement by the bank, building, in institutions, legislation, government capacity, trickling down all the way to individual investments in private sector firms in the forest sector. And I think this Unified Knowledge Bank will be a very powerful tool in making that happen. I was not absolutely sure I got your point on this conservation, production. We see that it's the multifunctionality of forests and proper land use planning and making sure that we have productive functions, but also conservation where conservation is needed, restoration where restoration is needed, and creating forest economy the forest economy can also be built on conservation. Nature-based tourism, non-timber forest products, all these are part of the forest economy story. It doesn't require that we cut trees to create forest economy. That's part of the forest economy, but it's not the whole forest economy. So that's why kind of having a holistic approach to the forest sector, recognizing different functions in different parts of the forest landscape, is the key to our approach. Over to you, Benoit, if you want to address the lack question.
Well, first of all,
1 minute.
Okay, that Global Challenge Program is called Global Challenge Program. I'm reading on forests for development, climate, and biodiversity. But yeah, Marco, I mean, maybe sometimes we, inadvertently mistake one land use for another, but I think generally speaking, including in the Paraguay project, we're pretty specific about, commercial plantation, forest restoration, agroforestry, and we try to separate, and of course, forest conservation, and we're not confusing. So call us out if you think we do. But I think we're getting better. And I wish we had so many more forest projects. There are quite a few, but in terms of IDA, IBRD, it's actually often not at the top of the agenda of the government requests. And I think we could do more. I don't think we have reached a limit. We do We do our forest engagements differently, and I think we could, now with all the financial innovations that exist, take on more and bigger challenges. But it takes a government to request or a private company in the case of IFC, obviously.
Thank you, Benoit. And I will turn it over to Omar to close this session with a conclusion. Thank you.
Yes, as a conclusion for the Centro de Estudios Queñoy, the so-called Sustainable Forestry Project presents itself as green and climate friendly, but in reality, it reproduces the same extractive model that has caused deforestation, inequality, and environmental degradation in Paraguay. Large-scale eucalyptus plantations are not forests. They are industrial systems that prioritize profit over people and ecosystems. What Paraguay truly needs are policies that restore native forests, protect biodiversity, and strengthen the livelihoods of rural and indigenous community. By learning from the local experience and traditional knowledge, we can move toward a more just and sustainable future. One where forests are not just plantations, but living ecosystems that sustain both nature and people. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. And I think you have raised one of the main questions that we have been discussing with the bank for years. Most of your projects are demand-driven by clients, and how to convince your own clients to get money to do more forest projects that actually to push for more conservation against, for example, commercial plantation and forest restoration, or kind of do less agribusiness and more agroecology, and those type of alternatives that communities are pushing for. So I don't know if you have any closing, 1 word, 2 words, and we can close the panel.
No, I think it's a good way to finish.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, now thank you very much, everyone, for paying attention and bearing with us during this discussion. Thank you very much.
Recording stopped.